Ever catch yourself doing something almost automatically? Like reaching for your phone the second you wake up, or grabbing a coffee when you swore you'd cut back.
It's like we're on autopilot sometime.
Exactly. It's the power of habit. And in this deep dive, we're going to break down how those habits actually work. We're exploring The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. It's fascinating stuff. He gets into the science of why we do what we do, both in our personal lives and even how habits play out in organizations.
This is a real eye-opener.
For sure. By the end of this, you'll understand how to actually use those habits to make positive changes.
Because the key is understanding those automatic patterns.
Right.
That's the first step to taking control.
Right. So let's start with the basics. The habit loop Duhigg breaks it down into 3 parts. Cue, routine, reward. You know, like that classic morning coffee routine.
Yeah, the smell of coffee brewing, or maybe just hitting that point of grogginess when you first wake up. That's your cue, right there.
It triggers the whole thing.
It sets off the routine. You stumble to the kitchen, grind the beans, brew the coffee.
And then boom, the reward, that caffeine kick that gets you going.
Exactly. It's a simple cycle, but man, once you understand it, it can change everything.
It makes you look at everything differently. And what's crazy is how deep these habits are rooted in our brains. Like, Duhigg talks about this guy, Eugene Pauly. He had severe amnesia.
Oh yeah, Eugene's case is wild. Despite not being able to remember recent events or even recognize his own family, he could still form new habits.
So even with memory loss, he could still do these routines.
It was like clockwork. He'd follow his daily routines without a hitch. It proves that habits aren't just memories, they're wired into our brains on another level.
So there's really something going on in our brains. That's amazing. So it's not just willpower or making a conscious effort to change?
Nope, it's neurology.
Wow. So what part of the brain is in charge of all this?
The basal ganglia. It's like the autopilot of your brain taking over those repetitive actions, so your conscious mind is free for other things.
That's why they're so hard to break.
Exactly. They bypass our decision-making process.
Okay, so we've got the habit loop down. But what about cravings? How do they fit in?
Well, Duhigg tells this great story about Claude Hopkins, an advertising legend. He basically got America hooked on brushing their teeth.
I remember that from the book. He was
Yeah.
like the Don Draper of toothpaste.
Right. But his real genius was understanding that it wasn't enough to just sell a useful product. You had to create a craving, tap into a desire that would make people use his toothpaste every single day.
And his cue was tooth film, that kind of grimy feeling you get on your teeth. He made people obsessed with it.
It became a problem that needed solving.
And Pepsodent was the solution.
Exactly. The reward was that clean, tingly feeling after brushing. He linked the act of brushing to something pleasurable, and bam, sales went through the roof.
It's like he figured out a way to hack our brains.
Pretty much. Which is why Febreze flopped at first. Remember? They focused on getting rid of bad smells, but forgot about the craving.
Right. People didn't necessarily want just no smell. They needed something more.
They had to make people crave a clean, fresh-smelling home, that positive feeling. Then the habit would stick.
Okay, so we've got the habit loop, cravings. Now, how do we actually change our habits?
Well, Duhigg calls it the golden rule of habit change.
Okay, let's hear it.
Keep the cue and the reward the same, but change the routine. It's not about massive life overhauls. It's about tweaking the behavior itself.
He gives the example of Tony Dungy, the NFL coach. He turned around losing teams, not just by focusing on talent, but by changing habits.
Exactly. Small changes in routine, repeated over time, made a huge difference.
So like, let's say you want to eat healthier snacks, but you still need that afternoon energy boost.
Right, so the cue is that mid-afternoon slump. The reward is feeling energized.
But instead of reaching for chips, you grab some almonds or a piece of fruit. Same cue, same reward, different routine.
Exactly. You find a new path to the same outcome.
I like that. And Dungy also emphasized belief, right?
Huge factor. He got his players to buy into the process.
So it's not enough to change the behavior. You have to believe that new routine will work.
You have to trust that it will deliver the reward you're looking for. Makes sense, right?
Absolutely. So we've got the loop cravings, the golden rule. Then Duhigg takes it even further with this idea of keystone habits.
Keystone habits are fascinating. They're like the foundation, the habits that impact everything else.
Like the keystone in an archway, holding it all up.
Exactly. He uses the example of Paul O'Neill, the CEO of Alcoa.
The aluminum company.
Yep. You wouldn't think worker safety would be the key to bigger profits, but that's exactly what happened.
No.
O'Neill was laser-focused on worker safety. It became the keystone habit that changed the whole company culture. Better communication, more efficiency, and, yeah, record profit.
So instead of trying to change everything at once, You find that one key habit that sets off a chain reaction.
You find a domino that knocks down all the others.
I love that analogy. It's like a ripple effect of positive change.
Exactly. And here's the encouraging part. We don't have to figure this all out alone. Duhigg even shows how something like willpower can be developed systematically.
Because we always hear willpower is something you either have or you don't.
Right. But Duhigg says that's not true. He uses the example of Travis Leach. Went from a rough upbringing to managing a Starbucks.
And Starbucks is known for good employee training.
Their programs are designed to build willpower in their employees. They use routines and techniques.
So it's not just about making lattes, it's about building mental toughness.
Exactly. Like one example is the LTT method. Listen, acknowledge, take action, thank, and explain.
It's a mental framework for handling tough customer interactions.
Keep your cool. Stay empathetic. It's brilliant.
So willpower can actually be taught. That's fascinating. But is there research to back that up?
Duhigg says willpower is like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. That's not some magical trait.
It's a skill you can build.
Exactly. Yeah. And as we'll see in the next part of our deep dive, this whole understanding of how habits work applies not just to individuals, but to entire organizations too.
Now I'm really curious about that. I'm ready to hear more.
It's wild how Duhigg connects those individual habits to bigger patterns in organizations. You zoom out, and it's like the same stuff is happening, just on a larger scale.
Yeah. Right. It's not just about personal growth then. Yeah. It's about how teams work, how companies succeed, how whole societies change.
Exactly. And, before we get too far, I think it helps to recap some of the big ideas from the power habit that we've covered.
Yeah. Good idea. It's a lot to process.
So first off, we've got the habit loop, cue, routine, reward. That's the core of how habits function, whether it's grabbing coffee or finishing a project at work.
And it's not just some theory. It's literally happening in our brains, right, because of the basal ganglia. And Eugene Pauli's story proves it.
The guy with amnesia. But he could still form new habits. It's crazy, right?
It shows how habits are deeper than our memory. It's like they're hardwired in.
They become automatic responses to things in our environment.
And then we can't forget cravings. Claude Hopkins, the Pepsodent guy. He knew you had to create a craving, not just offer a good product.
He nailed that reward part of the habit loop, linking brushing to that fresh feeling so people craved more Pepsodent.
He was a marketing genius. But it also shows something about us humans. We're driven by rewards.
Physical, emotional, even social rewards. Yeah. They all matter. And that brings us back to the golden rule of habit change. Cue and reward stay the same, but the routine is what you change.
Like Tony Dungy and the NFL team.
It changed those routines, and it led to huge improvements.
You got to find a new way to get to that same result.
Exactly. Yeah. And belief is key, too.
Yeah.
You got to buy into the new routine.
Right. It's not enough to just go through the motions. You have to believe it'll work.
And that leads us to keystone habits, the habits that have that ripple effect.
Like Paul O'Neill with the worker safety thing at Alcoa?
It changed everything for that company.
It makes you think, what keystone habits could I start that would change things for the better?
It's worth thinking about. And remember, Duhigg also talked about how organizations can build willpower in their employees. Starbucks example.
Oh, yeah. Their training programs are really interesting.
It's not just job training. It's personal development, too.
It seems like those principles could be applied anywhere, though, to teams' communication leadership.
You're right. Duhigg dives into that. He compares the crisis at Rhode Island Hospital, where bad habits led to a big medical error, and the King's Crossfire, another tragedy caused by routines.
Those stories were intense. It's scary how even good organizations can fall into bad habits.
Now, the consequences can be huge. But here's the thing. Duhigg also shows how those same organizations turn things around.
So it's possible to break free from those negative patterns.
It's about changing the routines, building a culture of safety and accountability.
Makes sense. Okay. Then Duhigg takes us into the world of big data and predictions. How companies like Target use our shopping habits to figure things out.
Like if someone's pregnant. Or even their political views.
It's kind of freaky how they can do that, just from what we buy.
It's the power of data analysis. But it does make you think about privacy, too.
For sure. Like, who has access to all this info, and how are they using it?
It makes those targeted ads seem a lot less random, doesn't it?
Yeah, like they're reading my mind. And Duhigg connects this to how radio stations make us like new songs.
They play them next to hits. So we start to associate them with something we already enjoy.
It's all about influencing our choices, even shaping our tastes and opinions.
It's powerful stuff.
Yeah.
And then Duhigg shifts gears to talk about the social side of habits, how our connections affect our behavior.
Like Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott.
It wasn't just about her. It was about the whole community and their shared habits.
That's what made the movement so strong.
Our habits are shaped by the people around us, and it can lead to incredible change.
Like social contagion, good habits or bad habits can spread.
And it's not just about protests either. Look
Yeah.
at Rick Warren and Saddleback Church.
He built that whole community using those same principles.
He knew the power of social connection and shared habits.
This book really makes you think differently about everything.
Right. It all comes down to that big question. Do we have free will, or are we just controlled by our habits?
And Duhigg uses the stories of Angie Bachman and Brian Thomas to explore that question.
It's deep stuff. Makes you question how much control we really have.
Where does habit end and free will begin?
That's the million-dollar question. And that's exactly what we'll talk about in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we've explored all this fascinating science behind habits. Now it's time to actually put it into practice.
We've spent a lot of time talking about how habits work. But the real magic happens when we use that knowledge to make changes in our own lives.
If our listener is ready to start harnessing the power of habit, where do they even begin?
It starts with awareness.
Yep.
We've talked about the habit loop: cue, routine, reward. But have you ever really stopped to examine your own habits through that lens?
Honestly, it's so easy to just go through life on autopilot.
It is. But if you want to make lasting change, you got to understand those patterns first.
Okay, so what's the best way to do that?
Simple. Grab a notebook. Write down your habits. What triggers that snack craving? What's the routine that follows? What's the reward you're after?
It's like shining a spotlight on those unconscious habits.
Exactly. Once you see the cycle,
Mm-hmm.
then you can start changing it.
And we know the golden rule. Keep the cue and reward, but change the routine. Like if you want to start exercising more regularly.
Yeah. Let's say the cue is that after-work slump. Routine is hitting the couch. Reward is relaxation.
So instead of trying to fight that urge to relax, you find a new way to do it.
Swap the couch for a walk or a quick workout. Same cue, same reward, different routine.
And that's where belief comes in, right? You have to actually believe that new routine will give you that same feeling of relaxation.
Belief is powerful. It's not just about forcing yourself. It's about trusting the process and aligning your actions with your expectations.
Makes sense. Okay. What about those keystone habits? We touched on that earlier.
Those are the game changers, the habits that can transform everything.
Like Paul O'Neill and the worker safety focus at Alcoa.
It had a ripple effect throughout the whole company.
So finding those keystone habits, that's a good place to start.
It is. What's the one habit that could kickstart positive change in your life?
Is it exercise? Is it meditation? Is it getting enough sleep? It's different for everyone.
Exactly. But here's another thing to remember. Our environment plays a huge role too.
Our surroundings can make it easier or harder to stick to our habits.
Like if you keep healthy snacks in sight, it's way easier to make a good choice.
Right. Make the good habits easier, the bad habits harder.
Exactly. Little tweaks can make a big difference. And don't forget about social support.
Oh, yeah. Having people in your corner can make all the difference.
Find a workout buddy. Join a group. Find people who are working towards similar goals.
It's like having a cheering section as you're making these changes.
Exactly. It goes back to that idea of social contagion.
Hmm.
We influence each other. Our habits spread.
It's been amazing exploring the power of habit with you. We've learned so much about the science of habit formation, the psychology of change.
And the incredible power we have to shape our own lives.
It's not about being perfect. It's about understanding these patterns and using them to create the life you want.
You're not stuck.
Mm.
You can break free from those negative cycles and build habits that support your goals.
It's been a truly insightful deep dive into the power of habit. I think our listener is walking away with some powerful tools for change.
I hope so. Remember, it's not about being a slave to your habits. It's about becoming the architect of your life.
That's a great way to put it. Thanks for joining me for this deep dive into the power of habit.
It's been a pleasure.